Of course, the speakers have muted themselves as well. Good afternoon. So welcome to the EUTOPIA-TRAIN webinar on navigating open science in Horizon Europe. Utopia University Alliance is an alliance of 10 universities, which started with 6 universities. And this grouping is carrying out different projects. One of them is EUTOPIA-TRAIN project. In EUTOPIA-TRAIN, we have a work package on open science and societal outreach. And in there, we have like different tasks. One of the tasks is also organizing trainings on different topics of open science. So this is like the basic information about the webinar, and now some housekeeping rules, which are of course nowadays the same for all the events. Yes, we can see the slides, Lennart. Lennart, if you could please change the slide to the next one. The really typical housekeeping rules nowadays. If your microphones could be kept muted during the presentations. If you want to ask the question, you can just raise your hand and we'll give you the word. Also, you can write your questions or comments in the chat function. The webinar is being recorded already, and we will upload it to the Utopia YouTube channel. And presentations will be also sent to registered participants. My name is Mojca Kotar. I work at the University of Ljubljana. Among other things, I also coordinate support for open science. In this function, being part of the EUTOPIA-TRAIN project, I'm very pleased to be hosting this event today. And our objectives today are to highlight the open science requirements in Horizon Europe. This is our first presenter. Then present services such as the publishing platform Open Research Europe and what it offers for different open science practices. Then we have a presenter who will tell us how practically they carry out different open science practices in a European project. And at the end, Lennart will give us a quick summary how we want to support researchers in the EUTOPIA-TRAIN project. And our first speaker today is Alea Lopez de San Roman. She's a policy officer at the European Commission. She works at the Directorate for Research and Innovation in the Open Science Unit, where she contributes to the development and implementation of the EU policy on open access to scientific results. She has ample open access experiences in a sense of being a part of the open access policy group at LERO, which is the League of the European Research Universities. And her other expertise includes international relations, EU science diplomacy, and EU research policy. So we are very happy, Alea, to have you here. And I'm giving you the screen, please.
Thank you very much, Mojca, and thank you very much for having me here today, for the invitation, also Lennart, and for the organization of this event. It's really a pleasure to be this afternoon with you. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Oops. I think now you should be seeing the slide.
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. So let me go and present about open science in Horizon Europe. And why is open science? Why open science and what it is for us? So there are many definitions, of course, of open science, and it's an evolving concept. But we understand open science to be sharing knowledge and tools as early as possible, not only between researchers and between disciplines, but also with society at large. And why is the European Commission supporting and promoting open science in its very different roles? So here I will focus today on our policy in Horizon Europe as a funder, but also when we initiate legislation, when we recommend to the member states, when we finance capacity building. Why open science? Because we believe open science to improve the quality, the efficiency and creativity of research, and very importantly, the trust by society in science. In particular, open science is beneficial for scientists and funders, for example, by tackling the reproducibility crisis, by fostering the response to societal challenges, fostering the access to and sharing of results that generates higher impact through collaborations, generating new research findings and decreasing inequalities, and because there are large opportunity costs of non-fair data, that is data that is not findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And let me focus on what are the Horizon Europe Model Grant Agreement requirements with regard to open science. We can divide those in three main categories. Those obligations that refer to open access to scientific publications, those obligations that are about research data management, and what we call additional open science practices, in that they go beyond open access to scientific publications and research data management. With regard to open access to publications, there is no obligation for our beneficiaries, for Horizon Europe beneficiaries, to publish. But if they decide to publish and there is a peer-reviewed scientific publications, beneficiaries will have to ensure open access to those peer-reviewed scientific publications that relate to the results. How? In particular, they must ensure that at the latest upon publication, there is the position of the author-accepted manuscript or the version of record, so the author-accepted manuscript after the peer review accepted for publication, or the version of record, that can be the final, the publisher with the publisher layout, in a trusted repository. I will present later on what are the characteristics of those trusted repositories, and to ensure immediate open access via the repository under a Creative Commons Attribution License, CC BY, or equivalent license. And we allow Creative Commons non-commercial, Creative Commons non-derivatives, or the combination of the two, or equivalent licenses for long text formats such as books and monograph. So very importantly, some elements in here. Open access always has to be ensured via repositories. Repositories have always played a central role in our policy on open access. Why? Because they ensure long-term preservation, because we believe in the function they have in empowering also the research community. So no matter where our beneficiaries publish, even if they publish in a full open access journal, that is not enough to ensure compliance with the obligation. They need to ensure open access via the repository. Importantly, open access immediately at the latest at the time of publication. That is a novelty in Horizon Europe, and specific open licenses that we require. And then they will have to ensure that there is information via the repository about any research output tool and instrument which is needed to validate the conclusions of the scientific publication. So a special emphasis here in Horizon Europe about the reproducibility of research results. We also have certain requirements with regard to metadata that must be open under a Creative Commons public domain dedication or equivalent, in line with the FAIR principles, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, and provide information, amongst others, about the licensing terms and persistent identifiers. So beneficiaries or authors, this is an explicit provision that we have here in Horizon Europe, both in the Horizon Europe regulation and in the Model Grant Agreement, must retain sufficient intellectual property rights to comply with the open access requirements. Beneficiaries or authors, because it depends on the national legislation on copyright, whether it's the institution or the authors, the first copyright owner of the publication. And why are we explicitly requiring this? Because unfortunately, it's still the case that some researchers, when signing publishing agreements with publishers, they are assigning their copyright to publishers, and that assignment of copyright then prevents them from complying with the open access requirements, for example, by setting embargo periods, on not having the adequate licenses. So now very explicitly, we require beneficiaries or authors to retain enough IPR to meet the open access requirements. Also, publication can happen in the venue of their choice. They can choose where to publish, our beneficiaries, but publication fees are reimbursable only if publishing venue is full open access. What does this mean? That publishing venue in which all content is openly accessible to everyone. Those hybrid venues in which part of the content is openly accessible to everyone, but part of the content is only accessible to subscribers, for example, our beneficiaries can publish there, but the publication fees will not be eligible cost for under Horizon Europe. And beneficiaries have the possibility to publish at no cost for them in Open Research Europe, the European Commission Open Access Publishing Platform. I will not elaborate on that because Michael will do that afterwards. So that with regard to open access to scientific publications. Let's now move to the second set of category of requirements, the second category of requirements that is about research data management. Beneficiaries must manage the digital research data generated in the action responsibly in line with the FAIR principles. And establish and regularly update a DMP, a data management plan for generated or collected data, as soon as possible and within the deadlines that they set out in this DMP. They will have to deposit the data in a trusted repository. This repository will have to be federated in the European Open Science Cloud, EOSC, if that is required by the call conditions, and they will have to ensure open access under a Creative Commons attribution, CC BY license, public domain dedication, or equivalent, following the principle as open as possible, as close as necessary. What does this principle mean? That in the case of research data, we allow for exceptions. I will present those exceptions afterwards. And provide information via the repository about any research output, tool, or instrument that are needed to reuse or validate the data. Here again, for research data, we have certain requirements with regard to metadata that must be open under a public domain dedication or equivalent. Here, to the extent that legitimate interest or constraints are safeguarded, there are exceptions that would allow to keep the metadata closed, in line with the FAIR principles, and provide information, amongst others, about the licensing terms and persistent identifiers. For those of you familiar with Horizon 2020 and also pilots that we have had in previous framework programs, you will see how the focus has evolved from the focus with regard to research data on open access to research data, always as open as possible, as close as necessary, because we always allow for exceptions, to research data management in line with FAIR, in which open access is part of this research data management in line with FAIR, always allowing for exceptions. What are the main differences? In the case of publications, no obligation to publish, but if there are publications, peer-reviewed scientific publications, open access must be ensured, immediate open access via open licenses and the repositories. In the case of research data, they will have to be adequately managed with a DMP, but open access is subject to some exceptions. In both cases, for publications and data, information must be provided via the repository to ensure the validation, so with the tools and instruments that are needed to validate, and certain requirements apply with regard to the metadata. In the case of the metadata of publications, no exception to the openness. In the case of the metadata of research data, there are exceptions to the openness. And here I would like to present the exceptions, so what we call as open as possible, as close as necessary, the exceptions to open access to research data. Data may be kept close if providing open access is against the beneficiary's legitimate interest, including, for example, commercial exploitation, or if it is contrary, providing open access is contrary to any other constraints, such as data protection rules, privacy, confidentiality, trade secrets, security rules, or could be against other obligations under the grant agreement. Here I include one slide about what we understand by trusted repositories in Horizon Europe. Those are either certified repositories and or disciplinary domain repositories that are commonly used or endorsed by the research communities. General purpose repositories and institutional repositories are in general also acceptable, and trusted repositories share some essential properties such as mechanisms to ensure integrity and authenticity of contents, offering clear information about their policy services, or meeting national and international security criteria. You can see here the essential properties that we understand these trusted repositories to have. And then beyond open access to scientific publications and research data management in line with the FAIR principles, our beneficiaries will have to meet what we call these additional open science practices. Those are three main additional open science practices. First, where the call conditions impose additional obligations regarding open science practices, the beneficiaries must also comply with those. So any additional obligation that the call may establish. Second, where the call conditions impose additional obligations regarding the validation of scientific publications, the beneficiaries must provide digital or physical access to data or any result needed to validate the conclusions of the publication, to the extent that the legitimate interest constraints are safeguarded. What is the difference with what I mentioned before? With regard to publications and data, I indicated how beneficiaries must provide information via the repository about whatever tool instrument is needed to validate the conclusions or the data. Here we are not talking about information about the tool that is needed to validate, but about providing access to what is needed to validate. Also allowing for exemptions to the extent that legitimate interest and constraints are safeguarded. And third, very importantly, where the call conditions impose additional open science obligations in case of a public emergency, the beneficiaries must, if requested by the granting authority, the European Commission, immediately deposit any research output. We are no longer talking about only publications and data, any research output in a repository and provide open access to it under CCPI, public domain dedication or equivalent, unless it's against the beneficiary's legitimate interest. In that case, the beneficiaries will have to grant non-exclusive licenses to legal entities that need that research output to address the public emergency and to commit to rapidly and broadly exploit the resulting products and services at fair and reasonable conditions. These three sets of additional open science practices have been included in the general annexes of the main work program and therefore apply now and are obligatory additional open science obligations. And let me finalize. So those are the three main categories of open science obligations that our beneficiaries have under Horizon Europe. But also let me recall the importance of open science already at the preparation of the proposal. And why so? Because open science are evaluated. So they are evaluated under the excellence criterion as part of the methodology and under the quality and efficiency of implementation criterion. It's very important for the European Commission also to be doing what we're preaching and in the way in which we evaluate the proposals ourselves, that we also consider open science practices, also in line with all the efforts that we are doing with regard to the change in the research assessment system. Under the excellence criterion, proposals will have to provide, it depends on the template, but more or less 1 page to describe open science practices and research data and output management. Of course, here we are not intending to see I will meet the requirements. Those are obligations. How? Concrete information on how they are planning on meeting the obligations. And there, under quality and efficiency of implementation criteria, to explain the expertise track record on open science. And in the list of publications, publications are expected already to be open access, and if not, at least in a repository and on their way to open access. And data sets are expected to be fair and as open as possible, as close as necessary. Very importantly, the significance of the publications listed here are to be evaluated on the basis of the proposer's qualitative assessment and not per the journal impact factor. So what you can see here is a list of different recommended and mandatory open science practices. Mandatory open science practices are those that I presented per the Model Grant Agreement that are mandatory to also open access to publications, research data management, and those additional open science practices, which are also mandatory in that they have been included in the main work program by the general annexes. And the open science practices that go beyond those mandatory practices are recommended open science practices. For example, we can take pre-registration, register reports, preprints. You can see, for example, participation in open peer review, participating in citizen science. So this is a non-exhaustive list. All the open science practices that are not mandatory are recommended. And why are they relevant at the proposal stage? Because we incentivize their adoption via their positive evaluation. So evaluation concerns both mandatory and recommended open science practices, the latter where appropriate, and adopting open science practices is incentivized through the evaluation procedure through the recommended practices. If there are recommended practices, they are positively evaluated. And when open science practices are duly justified as not appropriate for the project, the score is not lower for not addressing those or for a lack of expertise. For those that are mandatory, of course, it can be only in the case open access to scientific publication is mandatory. Only in the case in which there are no publication, it doesn't apply. Otherwise, they will apply. And all work programs, except for the ERC, evaluate open science practices as outlined above. So just let me finish with a link to the reference documents, to the legislation, the Horizon Europe regulation, to the model grant agreement, guidance on the model grant agreement obligations via the annotated grant agreement, and guidance with a focus on the proposal stage and further information, recommended open science practices, mandatories, how proposals will be evaluated in the Horizon Europe program guide, DMP template to be found under the templates. Preparing a proposal, the Horizon Europe program guide can be quite useful, and also the support video for experts that we have prepared on how to evaluate open science. So thank you very much for your attention, and happy to take any questions, comments that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alea. That was really a clear presentation of it might be a complicated topic for researchers, open science. I'm wondering, since open access to publications is quite a consolidated behavior, I could say, after FP7 pilot, open access pilot in FP7, how is it nowadays with other open science practices in proposals, in Horizon Europe proposals? Do you have any experience with this, or did reviewers comment? Is it like complicated for beneficiaries when they have to plan like research data management, trusted repositories, and so on? How is this going on?
Yes, indeed. So thank you very much for that question. I think, indeed, with open access to scientific publication, our beneficiaries and proposers are more familiar with it, although there are important novelties. For example, the immediate licenses will require the fact that we are no longer reimbursing publication in hybrid venues. So there are some novelties or IPR retention that attract attention and may need further guidance on how to meet those requirements. And then, indeed, we are moving to research data management and other research outputs, which is also evaluated at the proposal stage. And on that, we are also putting more emphasis and trying to provide more guidance on how to meet those, also those recommended open science practices, and how beneficiaries or proposers can go the extra mile in open science. Let's see, that requires a little bit more attention. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Lennart is suggesting a question. So for you, so would you have practical examples for how to provide the information needed to validate results? What would be the scope of this information, I guess?
Yes, for example, a software that might be needed, or the model of algorithm that is information about what is needed to validate those conclusions presented, for example, in a scientific publication. So just to provide information about the algorithm that has been used. So this is what we mean by the tool instrument that might be needed to validate. In the case of data, of course, the link to the data set that allows to validate the conclusions of a publication, that is, I would say, crucial. So it's, yes.
Thank you very much. I see no questions for participants. We really invite you, all the participants, to ask now. You have really very capable people here on the call, and please take advantage of all of them. You cannot meet them in person nowadays, I guess, still. And thank you very much, Alea. We will now switch to the second presentation. I'm very pleased that European Commission is setting examples in many ways, like in policies, which the Horizon Europe policy on open science is aligned with the European Research Area policies for countries, for EU member states. That's so good, really. And researchers have only one type of requirements to comply with in the total European Union. And setting an example also means establishing a publishing platform, which has all these fancy state-of-the-art functionalities. And we are really happy to have Markie here, who is a publishing director for F1000, the company which is like setting this up and maintaining the platform. Michael played a pivotal role in devising this open research publishing model when it started in 2013 and launching this F1000 research unit. the development of, now he oversees the development of the publishing platform services. And it's not only the European Commission that has decided to use F1000 software for such a platform, but it is also the Wellcome Trust and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And I know that there are many presentations of Open Research Europe platform, but I really sign up for all of them. And again, I'm very pleased to hear it. So Michael, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. That was a very nice introduction. I'll just share my screen. Here. Excellent. So yeah, thanks for the introduction, and I'm just going to talk a little bit more. Well, it's a perfect follow-on to Alea's presentation to talk about how Open Research Europe is trying to really support the Commission, in particular the Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe grantees, to enable them to do and practice open science. And this platform is specifically built in order to do that. So I'm just going to go through the why, who and what very quickly, and then I'll talk a little bit more about the publishing model, which is different to a traditional journal and like I say, is trying to bring in some of these open science practices to encourage people to really start to share all of their research, not just their publications. So Open Research Europe is a publishing platform that's owned by the European Commission. And it's a venue to support Horizon 2020 and since Horizon Europe's launch, Horizon Europe funded research. So F1000 joined the public procurement for this platform in 2020. F1000, along with some collaborators, was successful in its bid to provide the platform and to provide this publishing services on the European Commission's behalf. So we don't just work on it on ourselves at F1000, we work very closely with the Global Young Academy, LIBA, who's one of our important partners, Eurodoc, and also OpenAir. So with all of these partners, we hope that we can get excellent information about institutions, but also ensure that all the content that we have is discoverable as possible, and that's where OpenAir really help us. So that's what Open Research Europe is. So it's an open access publishing platform. But there was a reason why the publishing platform was created. Following on from Alea, it's obviously to support the open science practices of the Horizon programs, but there's also other features here that we wanted to experiment with to try and push further, changing how research is published. So there's a high scientific standards and swift processes. So I'll discuss the model a little bit more later, but there is publishing is a preprint first, and then the peer review happens once the preprint is live. So it's an open, transparent peer review process, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail. We're supported by a very excellent scientific advisory board. So these are experts across all subject areas across Europe who are helping us refine the model and support everybody behind the scenes to make sure that it's as useful as possible to the Horizon grantees. Importantly, there's no cost to the authors. Not to say that there isn't a cost. The European Commission is paying for the article processing charges. However, because we're doing a new model where the selection through editorial boards isn't used, the cost per article is very much cheaper than it is in a traditional open access journal. So the price for all articles on Open Research Europe is 780 euros, and I'm sure everybody's aware that typically, I think on average, an open access publication charge is around 2,500 euros. So we're trying to show that publishing doesn't also have to cost as much. So that's another part of why we're doing this platform. And as Alea mentioned, this is optional. The grantees don't have to publish here if they don't want to. The platform has been made available to enable Horizon researchers to meet open science goals, but also to publish their research if they want, but they're more than welcome to publish wherever they want. So there's no obligations to publish here. It's an option. So the ambitions of all of this was to operationalize some of the open science principles that was just discussed. and as I mentioned, to keep everything transparent and cost effective. So this is kind of exploring a different open access business model where it's funded. It's like a diamond open access model, really, where the funds are covered and authors don't have to pay. But another real big reason for the platform is it's really to try and support the reforming research assessment work that has been coming out this year and will be formally released a little bit later, because Open Research Europe is a venue that only supports article level metrics. It won't get a journal impact factor. So the idea behind Open Research Europe is for the European Commission to work alongside its grantees to show that it's the article that should count, not where it is published. It is what it is published. So Open Research Europe is going to play an important part in that as well. So as I mentioned, we publish articles as preprints first. So I'll show that in a second. But just to kind of corroborate Alea, everything's immediately open access with the correct licenses. There's open peer review that is practiced here. It's completely connected to all other systems. So we automatically send articles to Zenodo, which is one of the requirements of the Horizon program, and we try and make it as easy as possible for everyone to comply with their EC policy and principles. So not only does it help the authors, it also means that everything that the European Commission would like to see in open science practices is automatically dealt with by this platform. So it should really help authors comply with their model grant agreements. This platform is all-encompassing, so it supports all research disciplines, all of the grants that are covered from Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe. So that's covering science, technology and medicine, social sciences, arts and humanities. We have specific data guidelines and policies that completely align with the model grant agreement. So all of the policies that the editorial teams work with and support authors on means that they are complying with their grant agreements. And we also support different article types, and it's one of the key benefits to Open Research Europe is it's not just for traditional research articles where you publish something after you've completed many experiments, etc. It also supports the publication of other article types such as methods, data notes. There's a registered report article type, as Alea mentioned, trying to encourage open science. So there's lots of different ways people can publish their research and not necessarily just in a traditional research article. So we've got lots of different ways people can do that and use the platform. And it's currently, out of the 200 and something publications the platform already has, at least half of them are not research articles. So it's becoming very important for others to understand that they can share their method when they've come up with it without having to have to publish the results at the same time. So it's supporting the beneficiaries in that way. And the final thing I just wanted to mention is we're also building research communities on Open Research Europe. So this is a new feature that we've just launched where we're creating subject level areas to focus on and collate all of the research from the Horizon programs in a specific research area. So the example here, there's a health sciences section which covers all of the health science grants, and what it does is mean that it's easily discoverable in one place and that we can start working across all of the grants in the health sciences to collate research. So it's really becoming a popular feature and makes the platform feel a little bit less big with everything in it. Everybody can find their own little home on Open Research Europe. We've also just started launching special collections. So these are more dedicated article collections on really specific things that the grantees are trying to tackle. So here we have a plant and health and soil health collection, but we also have some on waste management and things like that. So again, we're just trying to make sure that there's dedicated areas for all of the many grants that Horizon supports. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the publication model because, as I mentioned before, it's a little bit different. So here is the kind of schematic of how it works. So an article is submitted to the Open Research platform. It's then published as a preprint and its data, associated data, is put in a trusted repository. So the editorial team help authors ensure that that happens. I'll talk a bit more about that in a second. So once it goes live as a preprint, it then undergoes peer review, and this process is completely open. So as a reader, you will be able to see every single peer review report and exactly what the author and the reviewer say to one another about their reports. And then once it passes peer review, the article is then, as I mentioned, a copy is sent to Zenodo, a copy might be sent to an international repository if we've linked up to that already. And it's also indexed in places like Scopus and PubMed and all of those other databases. So I'm just going to go through some of the sections and what happens. So on submission, unlike a preprint server, there's actually quite a lot of checks that go on. Some people get confused that it just goes up there and nobody's checked anything. So upon submission, the editorial team at F1000 check its eligibility. So we check that someone is actually got a Horizon grant. We check that the article's in scope, and then we check that it's not plagiarized. So they're our first initial checks. Once we're happy that it's funded by the EC and it's not plagiarized, we then do comprehensive checks on its reporting, editorial and ethical guidelines. Again, these are all aligned to the model grant agreement. So again, we're just making sure that everything is done in an open science way and enables people to share the research. So we check for the data availability, and we also support the authors making their data fair. So some authors still don't understand how to best share their data, and that's what the editorial team at Open Research Europe helps with. And then once we're happy that all of that is complete, we then put that into a text and data mineable formats like PDF, HTML, etc. We check all the citations and the references work well, and we make sure that all the persistent identifiers such as ORCID IDs, etc. Are correct. So before something is published as a preprint, there's lots of checks that go on. Software availability, as I mentioned, is completely aligned with the model grant agreement. So there are exceptions, but we go on the principle of open as possible, closed as necessary. And the beauty about Open Research Europe is the editorial team help with making the data availability statement and help ensure that everything is meeting the European Commission's guidelines. So there's a real good service here that typically gets charged for at other publishers, but Open Research Europe does this to help its beneficiaries and ensure that all the research is being made open. The peer review process. So here are the things that we kind of ask for. So all the reviewers must provide their name and affiliation. They must identify if they have any conflicting interests. They have to publish their full report and alongside the article, and we also keep tabs of each report, so each report is citable and each of them have metrics on how many times they've been viewed. So we're actually providing a bit more context around not just the article, but what did others think about the article. And then we also ask the reviewer to give a status of if they think the paper is approved, if they think the paper needs some work, so approved with reservations, or if they're really not happy with the paper in its current state and feel that it needs some revisions. So as a reader, you get to see exactly what the reviewers think. So when I said something needs to pass peer review, you need to have a threshold of the approved and the approved with reservations. So authors can always make changes. They can always talk to the reviewers, understand what they need to do to improve the paper. So there's limitless versions that they can do. But they have to get at least 2 approved, so 2 referees saying, I really think this work is of a good quality now, or 2 approved with reservations and an approved. So we work with the reviewers to ensure that all of the articles reach these statuses if possible. So I'm just going to show a little example of how that works. It can be quite confusing. So as a preprint, something will just get published like this. On the right-hand side of each article, there is a open peer review box. So this one's just saying it's awaiting peer review. But as part of the title, it's also very clear what's happened on the peer review of this paper. So this one's just been as an example of a paper that's just been published and it's awaiting peer review. Here's an example of something that has been through 2 rounds of peer review. And again, in the title, we say it's a second version, and then it's been reviewed 4 times, and it's had 2 approves and 2 approved with reservations. And on the right-hand side, you can see exactly who's reviewed the paper. They even link these reports to their ORCID IDs. And you can see by clicking on any of the links underneath the icons, the report that the authors have done. And so what does that look like? A reviewer report typically is quite constructive because they've been made open. So you get quite an in-detailed report of what you need to do. Responses, the authors then send a very detailed response to the reviewers, because typically authors and reviewers don't get to talk with one another without an editor. There's no editors in this process, so we're actually enabling the authors and the reviewers to talk through the article, which we find brings very constructive responses. And then on every version, there's a summary of what's changed from the first version and direct links to all of the reviewer reports. So it gives much more context to a reader about what's happened on that article. And finally, I just wanted to give a prime example of the data availability statements that we work with the beneficiaries on. And here you can see all of the underlying data. There's links to all of the data in Zenodo. All of these data sets are referenced in the reference list, so we can get citations on them. We also have a section called extended data, where anything that has been used to validate which softwares, etc., that can be put in this section too, and there might be some supplementary videos, etc. We don't allow any supplements. Supplements are often put in PDFs and nobody uses them, so we make sure that there's links to everything that a reader might need to use to validate or reuse the research. So with that, I just want to say thank you. I'll share the slides, or Lennart and team will share the slides, but happy to answer any questions if you have any right now. Thank you very much.
That was great, Michael. Thank you. I'm really impressed that you said half of submissions are actually for non-paper formats. That would be like methods, software data. That's a lot. That's great.
I think people or researchers are now understanding that, you know, it's important to share these things as separate things. Method sections, for example, in a traditional journal, you sometimes restrict it to a page, and you can't necessarily repeat something if you haven't got enough details in it. So we encourage people to publish them like that, and the methods and the protocols are very, very popular.
That's great. Professor Vranken has a question, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for the talk, Marcus. I have a question on the whole review process, because, like, you know, the traditional publishing model was like, you know, you had journals that had experts in a particular field, and then they would, you know, decide what was good and what was not, which had advantages and disadvantages, and because it was like very specific, but then also often very restraining for innovation. But you depend on, essentially, you always depend on people that have expertise in the field that the paper is in, right? So in your case, you really have to rely on a very extensive pool of reviewers that have an amazing variety of expertises. So how do you manage that? Because this is, I guess, non-trivial, right? To get engaged people that also...
It's a really good question. So upon submission, we ask the authors to suggest reviewers. So we have a criteria, obviously, that they can't collaborate with one another, etc. So we do lots of checks on them. But we have a tool which reads the paper and it cross-matches it with other papers within the indexing databases to come up with suggestions for the authors. All authors can suggest people who they know is relevant in their field. We then check them, but then it's those reviewers that get invited. So we actually rely on the authors to help us get to the right section, the right areas. And we also have a peer review pool, which again is based around subject expertise, but we do very much rely on the authors to pick and choose who they think the right people are. Now, as you just said, the model here is not to say if something should be published or shouldn't be published. We are just checking that the research is sound and is completely open science. And then we let the open peer review decide and the reader decide if something should be published or not. So you have to meet the threshold to be indexed. But realistically, it is a different model. And I think people still are getting over the fact that there's no editors making a decision because they are so used to it. But here, I feel it's a little bit fairer, but because it's all open, you still get very constructive, and the reviews, in my opinion, are sometimes more constructive than in a traditional journal.
Yeah, because I agree with you that open peer review is a good thing, because then you don't get the comments like this paper is crap point, and then
exactly.
But there is the point, however, that people can submit papers that are really in no shape to actually be reviewed. So do you do a check for that? Because I mean, there is sometimes, just because of language issues or way it's organized, it's not even, it's not feasible to review it. And then if you do get a paper, it's kind of easy to say, okay, it's not good. But so do you leave all that on the reviewers, or do you have like some quality checks?
No, as I mentioned on the pre-publication checks, we do a lot of that. So there would nothing would ever get published without being in a good shape. Now, because this is for Horizon grantees, typically most things come in a good shape. But on my publishing platform, F1000 Research, where it's open to the world, you do get a lot of papers, and our acceptance rate is much lower on that. But everything is completely checked for scientific soundness, and particularly, has data been made available, etc. And we have to do a lot of help. And I think that I don't know what Alea thinks as well, but not everybody is still ready for open data or know what to do with open data or how to share it. So I think the beauty of Open Research Europe is really guiding people and making sure that they are making things available and open.
Yeah. Because I must say, I sometimes review papers that have past editors that are,
exactly
not any shape, I would say.
Yes, I remember the days when I worked in a non-open peer review journals, and yes, you see some of the quality of the reviews are very, very poor and not very fair.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael, and to Professor Vranken for his questions. It's obvious that such platforms are appreciated for its novelty functions. That's really so good. And now we are very pleased to move to the next presentation. It will be by Professor Vranken, and it is on practicing open science in a European project. Professor Vranken is a research professor at the VUB, this is Université de Bruxelles in Belgium, and principal investigator of the Bio2Byte group at this university. He's also closely associated with the Inter-University Institute of Bioinformatics in Brussels, of which he is a former director. He is coordinating the RNAct project, that's Marie Sklodowska-Curie Action. And in that scheme and this MSCA scheme, this is Innovative Training Network. This project is funded by the Horizon 2020, and they have a lot of experiences with practicing open science, being important for sharing publications, research data, software, and tools. Professor Vranken, we are all ears to hear how you do it. Please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, this is from a more practical perspective, I would say, our experiences within this ITN. So I'm just going to give you already introduced me. I'll just give a brief background. So I'm really working in structural biology and structural bioinformatics with a focus on proteins, with experience in data integration and analysis, and also AI and machine learning, so very computational. And I have been long involved in open science. So I worked for a long time at the Protein Data Bank at the European Bioinformatics Institute, which is in biology the first real success story, I would say, in open science, which has been collecting scientific data for many decades now. And at the VUB, I've also been always involved in providing tools and data sets to the scientific community. So this ITN, RNAct, it started at the end of 2018. So it's Horizon 2020 project and not Europe. For 10 early stage researchers at ESRs in 6 different countries. And the research was on a protein called RNA recognition motif, RRMs, and how these proteins bind RNA molecules. So it's a combination of structural biology, bioinformatics, synthetic biology, and also biosensor development. So it's quite, within this field, quite interdisciplinary. And it really relies on a synergistic mix of computational and experimental approaches. So it's a mix of people doing experiments and people developing computational methodology and data analysis to really combine these things together to get the most out of the data and the methodology to try and understand how these RNA recognition motifs bind RNA molecules. Okay, so in relation to open science, what we promised in the project proposal in 2018 was we participated in the open research data pilot. We defined what we had to do there was define a data management plan at the kickoff meeting that was then specified in the consortium agreement. And we also set up a data management subcommittee within the project. So that was a promise that we made. Obviously, everything open access published in peer-reviewed green gold open access journals. Also open data. So publication of non-proprietary protocols, handbooks, data sets via the RNAct network website and in persistent online repositories, such at the time we said Figshare, but in the end we went for Zenodo. And also, I think, and this was the main deliverable in relation to open science, was to set up a real knowledge base that will store and provide our project data. Now, the reason for that was not only to provide this data, but also to enable the ESRs to train them essentially in understanding the importance of having findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable fair data in open science. Also with an eye to then pursue incorporation in the European Elixir bioinformatics infrastructure, which is very much driving a lot of the fair data and open science. It's very bioinformatics has always been very open in terms of sharing data, essentially. So this is one of the community where this is now very ingrained, I would say. We also had a workshop session that we wrote in the proposal on open science and fair data by Lennart in Ghent. So what actually happened then was COVID-19, of course. So there was a lot of delays, especially in the experimental parts of the project. A lot of the collaborations, the start was slowed down and a decrease in physical workshops. So this was not the easiest situation to make sure that people were working together and understanding what was going on. But I think we did quite well in circumventing that. So we created a data management plan and submitted it. That was one of the deliverables. The website, Lennart just posted it on the chat, was up and running early on, so also with links to everything that we are doing. And then in relation to open access, I would say, and here something has gone missing, I think. Yeah, okay. Let me just quickly fix that. All right. Some of my images have gone missing. I'm just gonna, I had some problems saving this presentation earlier on, and apparently this has now been an issue with the slides. I will just quickly fix that. My apologies.
Or Wim, I can also show the slide, I think.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
I think I can.
Okay. I made some changes and then suddenly it, yeah, actually, in fact, maybe you will have to do that, because I just lost them completely.
Yeah, then just let me know when
Microsoft is great when it works, but not when it doesn't work.
Should be that slide, right?
Yeah, this one. Thank you very much. So in terms of open access, we basically put everything in Zenodo. I think, yeah, I put a link on there. Can you just press down one more, Lennart, just to see? Oh, no, okay, so sorry, yeah, one back. In terms of open access, we published only 3 articles so far because, like I said, everything has been delayed. There's a lot in the pipeline now. We will make sure that this is published and as open access. So we've been using PLOS Computational Biology, which has been an open access journal for a long time. Nucleic acids research has also always been very open, and yeah, BMC molecular and cell biology is also an open access journal. So we really are going for those journals as part of the project. And I think this is now reasonably straightforward to do. I don't think open access is that much of a problem anymore for many researchers either, depending on where they are, I think, in their career. But I think that's more or less covered, like from my perspective at least. And then also we've done, next slide, Lennart. So open data. So we've put everything in Zenodo. So we have everything with the RNAct tag. So if you do this search in Zenodo, you will see all the open deliverables and all the data sets and also tools that we've developed so far in relation to those deliverables. So that's all available there. And also via the website, we link to these things. Next slide, Lennart. We did the workshop by Professor Martens, but in the end, I think, and this is something that, when you run a project, things happen. We realized that there was a lot of, it wasn't easy for the ESRs to understand what they had to do, essentially, in relation to the data and open science and what it all means. So we ended up adding a lot more data management related, especially data management related items in later workshops that we hadn't planned initially. Next, Lennart. So in relation to the ESRs, as I was saying, I think they were all convinced very early on of the relevance and the importance of open science. I don't think this is really an issue with younger people. But the practical implications and the daily effort required, I think you could look at it a little bit like climate change. Everyone's like, yeah, we need to do something about climate change. But when it comes to leaving the car at home, that's a completely different issue. I think it's a bit similar to that. Like, if you want to be doing science, taking care of your data and organizing it is not necessarily the first thing on your mind, even though it's important. Also, a lot of the concepts we realize are not trivial, like metadata. What does that mean? Ontologies. There's a lot to learn for young scientists in relation to that. And I think this is the main challenge, I would say, within a project like this, is to make sure that they actually understand these issues. Next, Lennart. So it was essential, I think, that we had this data management subcommittee within the project. I would highly recommend this to other projects as well, to have this as a separate entity, because it really helps to formalize these things. It really created a much improved ability of the project to provide fair and open data by engaging also with the ESRs. So this was monthly meetings with 3 to 4 senior members of the consortium. Because of course you cannot really share data unless it's properly managed, and until all the people doing the actual work, so in this case the ESRs, are aware of all the issues involved. So I think that was that's been required a lot of effort within the project to do this. Next, Lennart. Thank you. And what we have done actually within the project is that we've worked with the Data Science Wizard people. So the Data Science Wizard is a project that brings together data stewards and researchers to efficiently compose data management plans for research projects. It's also closely connected to Elixir, which is how I got to know about it. And what we in fact did with them is we started off, next, Lennart. We started off with their default project management like questionnaires, and we realized, and also from the feedback of the ESRs, that this was way too complicated for them. Like there was a lot of terminology in there that they don't know about. Like, again, ontologies, links to like websites that talk in very detailed terms about the data itself. And how you should manage it, but that's way above the level of what a normal researcher, I guess, should know. So what we did is we simplified it to make it more learning about data management kind of questionnaire in relation to their data. So it's a more concrete list of questions to enable them to go through like one data item that they collected, to describe it, and in the meantime learning about all the concepts involved, like data security, like when is it open, when is it fair, which metadata is important, which ontologies. And we are now writing that up in an article with all the ESRs. We're in a final iteration with them, and also we've given them a questionnaire where they can now give their feedback on the final project that we did. So we'll be looking into publishing that maybe with you, I think, for yeah, as one of the different article forms. And we will also present this at the upcoming Elixir All Hands meeting. So this is something that I think will be useful also for other projects, just to, yeah, teach the ESRs about data management and open and fair, open science and fair data. Next, Lennart. Thank you. So this is an example. So in the simplified, we follow the same template, but we've much reduced the text and the links. So you have the administrative information, which is always important, of course. Then next, reusing existing data. So are they using existing data? And then where is it? And how do they define that? And then next, Lennart. Collecting and describing the data. So which data do they have? Like which metadata should be associated with it, and to make them think about that as well. And then finally, the storing and giving access to the data set. So how persistently is it stored? Is it safe? Is it secure in case there's any issues with confidentiality and things like that? So, but in a simplified form, I would say. So this and the last version they seem to have appreciated, so that's good. But there is a giant gap at the moment between what your average researcher knows about this field and what the experts in the field know. I know there's data stewards to bridge that gap, but it's not always trivial in the context of a project, I think. So this hopefully will help from that perspective. Yeah, you still need to be able to talk the same language, essentially, which is non-trivial. Yeah, next, Lennart. So as I said, it's very difficult for the ESRs to label metadata and other information in a structured way, so that it's easily reusable. Also, we noticed there's large differences in the backgrounds of the ESRs. Yeah, like computational and experimental ESRs have a very different view on this. They both have data, but organizing and labeling the data is very different if you're an experimentalist or computational. And things like minimum information standards are essential there. So really practical, easy to use solutions within a particular field, and which will have to be developed and validated by the community. So this is a slow process. Yeah, next. Also large differences between the types of data. Large scale data, for example, is already often in a more consistent digital form, but if it's focused individual projects with individual experiments, then it's a whole different story. So this is non-trivial. Next, Lennart. So really, I think education on data management and open science and everything is very important for young researchers, if these benefits to wider society are to be realized, I think. So there's a huge effort needed in education there, I think. Yeah, next. So from our perspective, I think the benefits of doing things open access, open science is that it helps to situate the research work in a wider context. Also, especially for the ESR, so are my data in fact ready to be shared? Like, are they of a good enough quality that actually they're useful for other people? How can also my data then be useful for other projects? I think these are things that people don't always realize when they work on an individual project, how this could be used in a wider context for like meta-analyses, so that other people can extract information from it. So I think this has also been an important aspect in this whole project. And then next, Lennart. Also, of course, it helps us to continue the project science beyond the end date of the project, because it will all be there and accessible. So we don't need to go back to a hard disk and ask someone to like, can you find that file from 3 years ago? That is maybe still important now that we're writing a new grant proposal. So I think from that perspective also, this is very useful for sure. And then next. So just in relation to this project also, I think as an EU project, it's also in relation to data management, because everything is interconnected now, that limited deliverables are important, because it makes the data management easier. If you have to really create a new data set and you have to do that many times throughout the project, this slows things down. It's better to have one big one. where you really consolidate sets of data, because it is a lot of work to create a data set and make sure it's fair for people. And you could say, okay, they can do this throughout the project, but it's not so trivial in a day-to-day work setting, I think. Yeah, next. And then also we did a lot of communication with the project officer on this, that many issues were easily resolved with good communication, and yeah, we never really had any, I would say. And also then to take the opportunities within the project. And so we really developed this data management within RNAct, I think, because it was an issue that we took at hand. And I hope this will also be useful then for other people in the future. Yeah. Yeah, and also I think open science is important, but also I think as part of this, it was really important to have an open atmosphere within the project and to get the ESRs involved as much as possible in dealing with this, because in the end, yeah, it's their generation that is really gonna, pick this up and make the change, I think. So yeah, that was good to see how they've connected with it. And then, yeah, I think it's, yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Wim. I'm curious, after your experience with early stage researchers, and of course, you have a lot of colleagues which are senior researchers, was it more natural or easier for younger people to embrace open science? Or because senior researchers, they also have to learn about metadata, ontologies, and so on, if they're not really IT specialists?
Yeah. I think the metadata and ontologies for most senior researchers, you can sort of, I think that's a lost cause, unfortunately.
Okay.
In general, I mean, not everyone, but I think in general, this is very difficult. So that's what I mean. Like you really need to get the younger generation along, because they will be the ones that are going to change this, essentially, I think. Yeah, there is a wide gap between the current sort of senior researcher pool and the people that are into data management and everything, I would say. I mean, it's not unbridgeable. I think the key thing for senior researchers is that they realize this has to happen. And of course, like the whole funding situation at the moment, enforces that to a large extent, so that they can tell, the people doing the actual research that they should be, engaging with this. I think that's the way that this is going to work.
Yeah, that's great, because senior researchers are also in a position to organize for data stewards, which would benefit themselves and early stage researchers.
Yeah.
So it's good for the whole research group.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So we'll get more questions, I guess later. And as our last speaker, I would like to invite Lennart Stoy from the VUB Brussels to introduce to us the guidance that Utopia is preparing, and also trainings. Lennart Stoy is coordinating the open science activities in the Utopia-TRAIN project, and he also supports the open science office at the Vrije Universiteit Brussels. Please, Lennart.
Yeah, thank you. And this is just a very short overview of what we're doing, just because this is organized in the context of the Utopia-TRAIN project. So we want always to share a little bit and give some kind of preview of what we are producing, or about the topics, about the topic of today as well, and on open science in general. So what we would do on open science in Horizon Europe, we specifically drafted already like an internal guidance document that you can see the outline here on the right, with all the information that has been also, for example, presented by Alea today about the different recommended and mandatory practices. A lot, let's say, is a condensed version of the program guide for Horizon Europe, which is also in itself a great resource, actually, to explain a lot of the things that are in there and gives good ideas. This text is currently, I think, within the next days. We hope to have it online already by now, but because, as I say, there was a lot of things going on in between for Utopia. It's not on the Utopia page yet, but it should be online soon, I think within the next weeks or days, ideally. And this is also, for example, a text that we can use internally at the individual universities as well. So we plan to put it on our internal information page within the VUB, for example, and I think some other universities in the consortium have also said that they would like to use the text for their own internal, say, training and information purposes. Then also on the same topic, we have a few weeks ago given a training to the Utopia, the CIF fellows. So this is like postdoctoral researchers supported by Utopia. And we've also made this available, the material for that available as well on Zenodo, so that others can use this, reuse this, or we can, let's say, talk about giving another training, for example, for researchers at Utopia, and we can reuse the material so that we don't need to reuse this or redevelop these trainings each time we go for one. On top of that, we will also make the recording of this webinar available with all these things, of course. So this is another part of the package. On that, we have done a bit already in the past, but also we will do a little bit in the future. So, for example, we do want to do the same thing as today for some other topics. So, for example, for reproducible research, for open access, a more detailed session, also something on fair data management and research data management. And finally, you have also colleagues who are working a lot on citizen science, where they also do similar activities like we today. We will do this mainly with these two kind of pillars of providing, on the one hand, a webinar, or several maybe, for participants, for you from the Utopia universities and researchers as well, but also then provide some written material, especially where it's like really necessary, because there are some areas that are very well developed and there is a lot of guidance already, but in some areas it's a bit less. So we hope to help to navigate these topics through the Utopia-TRAIN project. And here on the right, you can already see we had a lot of webinars. We had two of those on citizen science, for example. There's regular citizen science clinic, which is also a recommended practice in Horizon Europe. So, if example, if you know researchers who want to address some of the recommended open science practices, it can also be citizen science, for example. In addition to all the things that Alea had really mentioned in the beginning, which is a lot. You have a lot of options, I think, to choose from to include different, let's say, open science practices in a project from beyond what is the pure mandatory ones. And we also, of course, always open for suggestions and questions about these issues. Very shortly, this should. Okay, I see a black screen for me, so I don't know what's going on. Sorry. Let's see if I can find the last slide here that I had. 1 second. So, of course,
you have closed your PowerPoint.
Yes,
you have closed your PowerPoint
on purpose, just to figure out what's going on. But yeah, we have a session upcoming at the Utopia Week. I think this will be hybrid, so there should be the opportunity also for participants to join remotely, but not as a training session, but more as about, okay, what do we want to produce and provide in the future as Utopia through the different projects that we are doing, but maybe also beyond the projects that are already doing. So everybody is, of course, invited, and the registration should, I think it's supposed to launch in this week. So stay tuned for the updates there. And that was it from my side.
Thank you very much, Lennart. Being from an Utopia University, I can confirm that this open science community is a great help, right? I see people from Utopia nodding. Yes, yes. We have some hot and really eligible questions in the chat, and they were answered already. This question about eligibility of article processing charges from Horizon Europe, but I guess it's the same in national funding now, also in Slovenia. I would add that in some countries we have national contracts with publishers, the so-called transformative agreements. And if we are lucky, and so far we were quite lucky, in Slovenia we pay approximately the same as we previously paid for reading only, but we do get a certain amount of APCs for free. So when you are from university that is part of such an agreement, your researchers can publish in hybrid journals without spending, without paying, and there is no issue then with eligibility or non-eligibility. And again, there was a continuation of this question. What happens if the author has signed away the rights through the copyright transfer agreement? Alea, I have a solution here as well. This is rights retention strategy, but I don't know. I will just let you answer this.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Marina, for the question. I saw that I started typing the response, but then I said, okay, it's better to do that orally. So your question was what happened when researcher can't keep the rights and signs a copyright transfer agreement and a solution then. So what we are putting really the emphasis is in trying not to reach to that situation once that the rights have been transferred to the publisher. First, of course, it would be important to see the terms of that copyright transfer agreement and whether that copyright assignment that has been done to the publisher would allow or not to comply with the obligation. So insofar as this copyright transfer agreement will prevent beneficiaries to ensure immediate open access under CC BY via repository, then they will put them in breach, this lack of ability of complying with the obligations, in breach of their grant agreement. What is important, from the time that researchers, institutions sign the grant agreement, there is these obligations to raise awareness of this prior, what we call prior obligation that exists, and not to sign an agreement that could put them in breach of that, because of course, then if they sign an agreement that could put them in breach, there is very little that can be done. So that is why we are putting the emphasis at that. We will also be providing further guidance on our side and further information on this prior obligation our beneficiaries have and how they have to ensure that they meet this obligation and they don't go and sign agreements that make them to be in breach of those. So I would say that time is too late. What they need to do is to make sure they are fully aware of the prior obligation they have. Also now, as you mentioned, Moya, there are these initiatives, for example, Coalition S with the rights retention strategy, also initiatives at the national level, secondary publication rights, to try to facilitate the situation. As part of our European research area policy agenda, we have one action on copyright also for research and to favor access and reuse of publications. So we are also exploring further possibilities and doing an analysis. But now I would say to put the emphasis on the prior obligations our beneficiaries have and how sometimes the publishing agreements they are signing, they should be really, really careful about what they sign and what that will entail a breach of a contract or an agreement.
Thank you very much, Alea. It's really important to comply with requirements of the grant agreement. And the next question is, I guess, a nightmare for researchers. All of them, they really worry how to really check, how to be really sure that all the requirements regarding confidentiality and privacy of individuals were properly dealt with. Would anybody like to tackle this question? It's yeah, quite serious with informed consent, complying with regulations, GDPR, and so on.
For my part, very briefly, because I think there are other speakers or participants better placed to talk about that, but I would say that is the importance of the data management plan. And already before at the proposal stage, that is what we have in Horizon Europe, what we call a DMP, non-DMP. At the proposal stage, we don't ask for a DMP, it's not a full DMP, but just proposals already to think about how they are going to manage the research data that they generate and other research outputs, so that they already consider all those aspects and they take them into account already from the very beginning, let's say. So, but I leave the floor, of course, to other speakers that might be better placed.
From the publication side, I think there's a bit of education needed with, particularly with sensitive data, that because we're supporting FAIR doesn't mean that you have to make your sensitive data open. There's lots of avenues to create managed access and things like that. So for me, it's making sure that people understand that, yes, you're working with sensitive data, but you just need to help us find or provide the path for someone to get to that data. And you can still do that in a fair way by being very clear in the data availability statement about what that data is, where it is, how they can get it. So yeah, I think we have a lot of you know, I have a lot of, particularly on the clinical side, saying, oh, I've got all of this patient data, I can't share that. And I always say, good, I don't want you to share that. I want you to have it in a format where people can find it easily and make use of it, and the right people can make use of it. So for on the publishing side, we support people making sure that they give us all the information needed to get that data, but we're very clear, we try to be clear, you don't have to make that, you know, a link and then people get straight to it. So yeah, I think there's a lot of, and I think Vim said it too, there's a lot of education needed around data and data management still. I think it's really good that everybody, the Commission and lots of other funders are moving towards DMPs. I think we'll have to go back and do a little bit more training sessions, particularly for the early students, about how to handle data effectively and to make it fair, because these things come out sometimes with best intentions, but we don't necessarily think about all the ways that people could make that happen. So I think there's still work for all of us to do on that.
Thank you very much. One of my experiences is that also data protection officer can help. All universities or organizations nowadays have DPOs because of GDPR, and usually, at least at universities, they understand a bit about research data and can help you also with this, maybe, hopefully. So the next.
May I add something to that?
Please,
because
please.
I think from the researcher perspective, we are obviously in a transitional period here. And it's non-trivial, especially with respect to clinical data, because you don't only have GDPR, you have the medical device regulation, you got the AI like recommendations and all that. I mean, it's impossible to basically deal with all of those from an individual researcher perspective. So central solutions are needed, but I think also there the Commission is working on like a health data platform, I think, and I mean this is essential because otherwise it's going to become impossible for people to actually use data for research in a safe way when it's sensitive patient data, at least. But even other data I think falls under those guidelines, so it's becoming it's going to become very difficult to do research for some types of data unless there are centralized platforms that enable it, I think.
Yeah, and I believe that's where EOSC comes in, and having these federated databases to help. But yeah, it's all in train, I think.
Yeah, but it's going to take a while.
But also some procedures like anonymization can render data research data a bit unuseful if you really anonymize totally. Yeah. So these are really all very burning questions, as the next one, which somehow connects us to the reform of research assessment. We have these famous journals now with very high impact factors, and everybody points that it is important what you publish and not where you publish. So how to do this now? Maybe with platforms. I mean, the platform, as I understand it, is to share with people, to share the content.
But it's still published, and it's still a tradition. It's still a journal article. The Open Research Europe won't be applying for a journal impact factor, and F1000. We don't think that the journal impact factor is a good metric. Either does many other people, but it's so ingrained in the system now that we have to take time, and that's where, for me at least, the reform of research assessment is really important, and it's great to see so many people signed up to it. And things like Open Research Europe are a way to say, well, there is a way not to do it, and providing somewhere to try. But I think the biggest question we have about Open Research Europe is, when will you get an impact factor? What is going to be your impact factor? And we're having to say, we're trying to move away from it, and that's something that we've got to communicate a bit better. But I don't see it changing very quickly soon, the need for being impact, because particularly in the European Union, each country has its own different rules and which journal lists you should be on and how many articles, and it's really, really complicated because it's so tied into research assessment on a country level as well as an institutional level. So yeah, lots of work to be done, but I think when the research assessment reform starts rolling out more deeply, we're going to really be pushing that Open Research Europe is a different way to support that publication without journal impact factor. But I think we're at the start of the journey.
I'm following with great content the facilitation of the European Commission of this reform of research assessment. I'm aware that more than 300 organizations have signed, also from such small countries as mine, Slovenia, and this gives great hope. Alea, could you just tell us in a few words? I think that now this agreement is being prepared, draft agreement, which will be offered to institutions to sign and join the reform. And that would be, in a sense, not to act alone, because universities are frightened to be the first ones to change assessment.
Indeed, that is, I would say, a very important exercise that is being facilitated by the European Commission as part of the Open Science also unit work. Why? Because a key element in open science is indeed the reform of the research assessment system. So no matter how much we push for open access, for fair data management, if we don't change the research assessment, and there is one, yes, the question about nature, about it's still there. So this is being done. More than 300 organizations have expressed their interest. The agreement is in preparation. So big push there in facilitating this, and the involvement of many different actors being necessary: evaluation agencies, funders, research performing organizations. Also, for example, what we do in Horizon Europe in the way we ourselves evaluate the proposals, explicitly instructing evaluators, please do not consider the journal impact factor as the proxy indicator of the excellence, and asking proposers to explain why their research is excellent, why they consider that beyond the journal impact factor and relying on it. So I think it's multifaceted, and indeed we are having that role, and research assessment is key in promoting and achieving open science.
I think it was very influential that ERC sort of banned the use of impact factor in proposals. Lennart, please, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, just on the topic of this call, I think 4 of our 10 Utopia members are already individual signatories. So that's the University of Ljubljana, the UPF in Barcelona, then University of Warwick, I think, as well. And our colleagues in Romania and Babeș, they also have things. They have also signed it, and we try to sign this as Utopia, because we have an activity also on that in the Open Science Work Package. But yeah, this is, I think, an ongoing process. So it will maybe take a bit for Utopia to sign it as an alliance. But we also had a first workshop on the topic in January. That is now a while ago, but we also participants said, look, we want to maybe try to look more into the quality of outputs instead of the venue, or to look at the diversity of outputs as well, so which would recognize, for example, data or other, like open peer review, maybe a bit more than the focus on journal articles. So we're working on that topic as well, but this is an ongoing discussion within Utopia as well. But we do want to have more activities on the topic as too after summer, so that we can also work towards, let's say, a framework for Utopia for the assessment of researchers with a focus on open science. But yeah, this is it's all, of course, it's very delicate and sensitive, of course, and not, it's all very, it's a system, so it's all very interconnected, so you need to really think about it and discuss it before, you carve things and you set things in stone, and then to avoid creating the same systemic issues that you have then as in the current assessment systems or system.
Thank you, Lennart. I hope that the avalanche has started with all these micro initiatives. And Marina is reminding us regarding copy transfer agreements with monographs. Yeah, indeed. I'm aware that publishing an open access monographs includes quite high book processing charges, and this might indeed be difficult. How to claim this expense?
Yeah, is that with regard to the book processing charges or the copyright? Was it with the book processing charges?
It's a combination. Yeah, if you don't have money, you transfer copyright to the publisher, and if you do have eligible funding or you're eligible for funding, you then just publish it as open access and pay, like, I don't know, 9,000 euros net.
and the time, because the slow rate for publishing books, it makes that when they may pay for the open access publishing books is 1 year after the end of the project or something like this, or they don't know exactly the date, so it's very difficult to manage all of this.
Indeed, with regard to the part on copyright, on that we had an addendum for Horizon 2020 that we are planning on updating. Of course, it's an addendum that our beneficiaries can use when negotiating with the publishers, but then they have to negotiate with the publishers. So we all know that is not straightforward, and sometimes they are in a kind of a weak position, but then we are planning on doing that. And with regard to book processing charges, indeed, that our policy, I think it's quite ambitious in setting the requirements that we have now also for long text formats. So the immediate open access via the repositories also applying to books. Then the only difference we make with regard to journal articles is the license, that for long text formats, we do allow CC BY and C, CC BY and D, and the combination of two, because in consultation with the stakeholders, they really call for that, that we allow for that. But indeed, we have been also ambitious in also putting books and monographs as part of the formats that are covered by our mandate under Horizon Europe, and fully aware of how challenging this can be for everyone, I would say, indeed.
Thank you. And in the chat, the next piece of information is from our friend Yvonne from Warwick. And she's informing us on this network, SafePath network, as being a very good route to provide, to share sensitive data. I'm not familiar with this, and thanks a lot, Yvonne. And I guess this is good for everybody else on the call as well. And Lennart has published the link to this call, or the latest information on the reform of changing the research assessment facilitated by the European Commission. And I guess we are sort of too late or late already, completing this webinar. So if there are no burning questions anymore, anybody can still send them to Lennart. He's used to such questions. And as a wrap up, thank you very much to all for attending, to all our presenters. Great presentations, really very much appreciated. We look forward to our future collaborations as well. So we have heard from Alea about open science, which is a really important cross-cutting principle in Horizon Europe with mandatory and recommended open science practices, some of them being a bit too much for researchers, but that's the way science develops and life as well. One really important development is Open Research Europe as an innovative open access publishing outlet. We expect more of them in the future, hopefully. Open Research Europe could be applied also for national funding or publications from national funding. Professor Vranken has shown us how early stage researchers are able to embrace open science practices, but they have to learn as well as senior researchers. And everybody needs training materials and support, and this is PR. We are Utopia. We support you in open science. Thanks a lot to everybody, and goodbye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks.